Well, the edges, these little pieces will fall out naturally. It looks like it's been nibbled by something. So it seems to simulate having been eaten by an herbivore, which may deter herbivores from coming, because if I hadn't seen how this happens, these actually, it actually has programmed areas where the leaf marges just fall off and give it that eaten look.
Oh, wow.
Right there.
Okay.
See a little bug.
That's where it starts.
Bug.
But it comes right off.
Yeah, so that will come off, and that will, we can take it off.
Yeah, you can. Maybe I'm recording.
To do it live here, so we can, in that little piece.
Oh my gosh.
And it looks just like a caterpillar or something ate there.
Yeah. Oh my God, that is hilarious.
So it's simulating being eaten.
Dear plant lovers, welcome to Fairchild's Tropical Botanic Garden in Miami, Florida. The garden spans 83 acres, which is around 63 football fields, and it's known for its extensive collection of tropical plants, palms, cycads, desert plants, flowering trees, and tropical fruits. The garden also hosts various educational programs, conservation efforts, and beautiful landscapes throughout the year. We are joined by a very knowledgeable host, the one and only Chad Husby. Armed with decades of professional experience and intimate relationship with many of the resident plants, I asked Chad to show us the most spectacular and unusual. We start the tour at the tropical rainforest conservatories, then move on to the Cycad vista and the arid Madagascar desertscape. We spend a huge chunk of time visiting remarkable trees and end up at the private collections that is off the public eye. Before we start, this is 3 episodes in one and it's dense with information. I recommend to watch this over many sittings, pausing and resuming at your own pace. In fact, we will not have an episode next week as I will be in China. I know you're tempted to ask why I did not split this into 2 or 3 episodes. Well, historical data shows that when an episode is broken down, the second episode will have very little views, and I personally prefer a full episode that has a beginning and a coherent ending with a nice view count. So with that being said, let's begin.
And before we get started, I would like to extend my gratitude to Palm Street for flying me over to Miami. Without that, this is not possible at all. And Mr. Chandra from Indonesia that made it possible for both of us to connect.
Good. We have one of the most spectacular flowers in the world. This is Tacca integrifolia, and it's called the white bat flower. And it has these remarkably long stamens that are really, really impressive. And one of the interesting features of this flower is they found that they actually generate a little bit of heat that will actually helps to disperse the fragrances that attract the little flies that pollinate them. But the pollination is still a bit of a mystery, exactly how it works.
Like these are the actual flowers?
Yeah, these are the actual flowering structures in here. I'm not even completely conversant with the details of how they're structured, but it's a fascinating, very complex flower. And this is a fascinating plant. It's in the family Cyclanthaceae, which is sister to the pandans. And it's only found in the Americas, and there's a lot of diversity in this family, and some of them look like palms, some of them look a little ferny like this one. And this is Dicranopegium quadracasaceanum, and one of the fascinating things about this is that it's pleated both the length of the leaves, and then it's got ripples perpendicular all the way along the axis of the leaf. So it's doubly rippled, which is quite unique in the plant kingdom in my experience.
Do you know what the function is for the ripples? Or?
It probably helps keep the thinner leaf more rigid, just like corrugated cardboard, but that's just a hypothesis. No one's tested that, but it does that. That is usually how pleating works in plant leaves is to keep them stiffer without having to invest so much in supporting tissues.
Interesting. I would imagine they would make really good water slides for little bugs.
Absolutely, yeah. That could be a great slide.
And this one, I want to guess this is a costus, but I could be very wrong.
Exactly. Yes, this is a costus. It's
interesting.
Costus malortianus, and this one has a lot of fuzz on its leaves, which is wonderful.
And very wide leaf for a costus, but they have that spirally growth habit, I guess.
The spirally pattern, and this is these get quite a bit taller, and we have a flower over here.
Like the foliage without the flowers, and how delightful is that?
Yes, indeed. One of the fascinating things about costus is that, they've found mathematical models for the leaf arrangements of pretty much all plants, with the exception of costus. This kind of stair-step spiral arrangement, it doesn't fit any of the mathematical models that they have yet, so they're still working on it.
easy for you guys, or is this difficult?
This is easy for us fairly. It's a little bit cold sensitive if we have a very cold winter, but it's fairly good grower.
Very hairy plant. Gorgeous.
And this is another fascinating costus that has the striping on the stems.
Oh yeah, I see it now. Can I step in here?
This is, yes, indeed, of course, yeah. This one's actually in the process of being described, so it doesn't have a formal name yet.
Yeah, let me find a leaf. So this, oh, it gets really tall. This is
Yeah,
the leaf.
and it gives the spiral. We can really see the spiral there.
Gorgeous. I love filming it from above, but obviously it will be a challenge for a plant this height.
Clematinensis, the mapu palm, which are fascinating because of this incredible natural variegation, and there's so much variation from one seedling to another. Some are much more contrasty than others.
Yeah.
And we even have a few different ones here that you can see the differences in the modeling.
I guess they would like the Florida weather, I guess. Except not the winters, you said. It's not.
Yeah, not the winters. They also tend to be a little sensitive. One of the limitations on growing plants here is limestone. We're on limestone, so a lot of our groundwater, well water, and municipal water is alkaline.
Ah, I see.
So a lot of liqualas don't like that.
Okay.
And so including this one.
They
this
like
one,
it acidic.
Yeah.
That's right. That's what I...
And so this conservatory, all these conservatories have reverse osmosis water for irrigation, so it's like rainwater all year.
Yeah.
So it's more acidic and it's more like their native habitat where they get rain all year. And yeah, this is a very interesting plant from South America. It's a tropical nettle, stinging nettle, and it looks quite fierce, and it is rather fierce. This will produce little welts on the hands after you touch it, but it's actually used medicinally in South America, and they use relatives of it in Europe medicinally also. They will actually intentionally sting themselves, and kind of after the stings go away, after about 10 or 15 minutes, it can help in pain management for people who have sore joints or arthritis, and just maybe the endorphins that are released when the pain goes away, when the sting goes away.
Yeah.
Can help with other pain, and it's kind of like bee sting therapy and whatnot. And so they call the therapy urtication. This is in the family Urticaceae, where they'll actually take leaves and slap them on their back and other parts of the body, and the welts will form, and then they'll go away, and then people will feel better afterwards.
Interesting, but does the initial sting of that hurt you? Does it feel painful?
Oh yes. You will notice that this actually, it's quite a sharp pain.
Yeah.
And then actually there will be little swollen bumps that will come afterwards.
Now the stinging part is I'm guessing is these needles.
Yeah, those needles.
So you don't want that getting into your flesh.
Well, if you want the therapy, yes, you would want it, but otherwise you wouldn't. But they actually, the little tip will actually break off. Okay. And it feels really, alarming at first, but one of the nice things about this species is that the irritation goes away fairly quickly.
Oh, like how quick?
Like within 15 minutes.
Okay. I know it sounds like we're encouraging people to do it, but would you? Probably not.
Well, I don't do it usually voluntarily, but
you have.
I have done it a little, because when I first encountered this plant, I was considering whether or not to grow it in the garden, and when I got stung by it, I thought no way. But then when the sting went away very quickly, I thought, okay, this is reasonable to grow, and especially because it has these interesting, medicinal uses, and because it looks so impressive. In fact, this purple version, with the purple underside leaves, are preferred by the shamans in Northwest South America.
Wow, that is awesome, and the leaf shape is gorgeous, and of course that very intriguing main stem here is just really quite something.
Absolutely.
So you say when the initial 15 minutes went away, it felt not pleasurable. How did?
Well, just sort of like after you've done some exercise, you sort of have this feeling of well-being after having been through a very rigorous experience like that. Something it's kind of feels a little bit like that, and I can't say how much of it is kind of the sort of a placebo effect type of thing, but yeah, it doesn't linger. There is a relative of this, the gimpy plant in Australia.
Oh yeah.
That's notorious for the pain lasting up to 6 months. Like where you feel it in the shower, it will sting again. This looks much fiercer than the gimpy, but the sting doesn't last nearly as long. So.
Awesome.
Yeah, and this is another relative of it here that's from the Caribbean. The sting lasts longer on this. This is Arera bassifera. but it's got these really impressive inflorescences and fruits. I don't know of this one being used medicinally, but it's a beautiful and fascinating plant and a very interesting
What am I
family.
looking at? These are berries.
Yep, those are the fruits, those are the berries.
So the blooms do they go straight to berries or do they actually?
They're very small. They're kind of, you can sort of see them emerging here. They're very, very small blooms.
Okay. And you said this is in the same family and you said sting.
So this is actually in the same genus as
genus.
this is Arera bassifera and this is Arera laciniata.
Okay. But this thing, does it give you, does it feel good after 15? Like how does it?
This
Can you
one
describe
lasts a little longer. This one I don't know of it being, used as a medicinal. It's one I wouldn't recommend getting stung by.
Okay, but do they have the stinging parts on this?
It does have the stinging parts, yeah. They're a little less obvious. They're kind of, you can see all along and down lower on the stem, they're quite prominent.
Oh yeah, oh now I see it. I was so distracted by the top portion.
But yeah, this one doesn't really advertise its sharpness so much. These kind of tropical rainforest ardisias from Southeast Asia, we don't have species names for them yet.
Okay.
But they're very. We have a native ardisia is a very widespread genus. So we have a native ardisia here in Florida,
Yeah.
and which has kind of fairly typical green leaves. But these ardisias from Southeast Asia, from the rainforest, can have spectacular leaves, very dark,
Yeah.
and beautiful clusters of flowers. And one of the fascinating things we've learned during our expeditions in Southeast Asia among the horticulturists there is that you can actually propagate these from leaves.
Oh yeah, I heard that.
I didn't learn until we traveled there and saw.
Now we usually see ardisias as ornamental plants grown in small pots, but obviously this plant is taller than we are. I guess they do become a little tree, does it?
Some of them do, yeah, and some of them stay much more compact and near the ground. So there's quite a bit of diversity. And
Yeah. But generally speaking, they're understory plants that love humidity. Is that the right way to generalize?
these ones with the really ornamental foliage, that seems to be the case, yeah. Whereas like our native ardisia here, Escaloniotes, can grow in much more exposure. It grows out in our pine rocklands, which are much more seasonally dry, harsher habitats. So
Interesting.
there are ardisias for all sorts of habitats, it seems.
It's just crazy because I visit a lot of ornamental plant markets and a lot of these ardisia/labesias, people are still not very, there's no concrete taxonomy or names for them. I don't know why that is. Has no one just stood up and said, hey, let's definitively call this something? Or
Yeah, I haven't come across any good definitive, work on taxonomy on getting the names right. But if it has been done, then hopefully we'll get some of this sorted out. But maybe it's just that a lot of the characters are very subtle to distinguish them. And
interesting. Well, we urgently need that. So
yes,
if a botanist is looking out, someone needs to stand up and say, hey, let's give them proper names.
Absolutely,
Because they're coming into our homes and people are tagging them on Instagram at weird random names. So
even getting the genera right, Labisia and Ardisia, which are very fairly similar in many ways. And
that's cool. But it's nice to see this grown so well here.
yeah, this is an Ardisia that is quite unusual. It's got much larger, thicker leaves than most of them that are from tropical Asia, and its inflorescence has these interesting leaves that are sort of like bracts.
Wow.
And
Interesting.
this was gifted to us by a collector in Singapore, and it's a very beautiful and unusual. And this was grown from a single leaf. It's a fascinating palm. They call it the window pane palm. It's Reinhardtia, and it does have these interesting little fenestrations. So you don't usually see fenestrations in palms. We think of them in things like monsteras, but this genus has some members that do this, which is fascinating. It's a fairly delicate palm for us, so we need to keep it in this conservatory situation. Heliconias that's known for its really ornamental foliage, very dark with some iridescence.
All right, I want to bring your attention to this Rhaphidophora that has unceremoniously clung itself to this palm. I don't think in nature they would like this kind of texture. They typically climb trees more so than this palm, but this is an interesting palm that has overtaken the roof of the greenhouse. That's really cool. And it's got that beautiful, almost trumpet-like shape.
Unlike many heliconias, this one is very slow and challenging to grow. Well, Sean, it so happens that this is actually a mimic of the Rhaphidophora cryptantha that's Monstera dubia, so it's from the Americas.
Wow.
Which in its juvenile form looks extremely similar. It's got this fascinating natural variegation with the green veins and the white areas in between the veins. But then when it matures, the mature leaves look like Monstera leaves with lots of fenestrations and yaps, whereas the Rhaphidophora has these clasping leaves its entire life.
Clavigerum?
Clavigerum, exactly.
Oh my gosh.
Yep.
That's crazy. This is like taller. Oh my God, it goes all the way. I guess it is a climber, this one, because anthuriums can be climbers, some of them.
A few of them are.
Massive.
And we have it covering one of the trees in the rainforest. It's
Yeah, oh my God. It looks like a Schefflera almost.
It sure does.
Oh man.
So yeah, it's the common Platycerium bifurcatum, but an enormous specimen. And it's fascinating because these are all clones of the original plant. So Platyceriums, many Platyceriums are what are called clumpers, and so the tips of their roots, when they grow out and be exposed to air and light, they de-differentiate, they become a whole new plant. So they actually will form a new shoot and new leaves and new shield fronds, new fertile fronds and new shield fronds. And so these are all genetic copies of the original plant.
That's awesome. And if you wanted to, you could separate them. You could pry them apart, but obviously this one's been kept together beautifully. This looks like the Cossus erythrophyllans that I grow at home, but you're saying that this is something else.
Yes, it's a Costus venosus from Panama. And it was originally collected in the 1970s, and it's quite distinct with these cups along the stems that collect water and whose function is still unknown. But it wasn't collected again until just a few years ago when a Costus expert was able to relocate some populations. But this is the original clone from the 1970s.
Wow.
And it's a very beautiful species, and it has a yellow flower that kind of gets hidden when the stems nod over. It gets obscured by the leaves, but if you know what to look for, you can find the flowers.
Beautiful. Sissy and fuzzy.
It has iridescent leaves on top and dark red underneath.
Gorgeous.
Yeah, this is Acma saniana from Fiji. It's a relative of Podocarpus. It's in that family, and it's a tropical conifer. And they're really relics of an ancient time. And New Caledonia, Fiji, Australia have the major concentration of these ancient tropical conifers. And unlike most conifers that have kind of waxy leaves, this has wax on both the top and bottom. They usually just have it on the bottom, so it's very, very tropical. Has stomata on both the top and bottom of the leaves.
Yeah. Does it not want to get any taller? Because it seems to be avoiding something over here.
This was
the ideal height that it wants to be.
Well, this was grown from a cutting, and some conifers, when they're grown from cuttings from a branch, they never entirely forget, or it takes a long time for them to forget they're a branch, and so they tend to grow more horizontal than vertical. If this was grown from seed, it would grow upwards and have a leader. So
interesting.
The different species have different tendencies, and this one,
this is beautiful.
It still remembers it's a branch.
Yeah. But I love this form. This is really, really an interesting.
It's very convenient for not keeping it within bounds.
And I love how the emerging leaf just kind of spread out and take over a negative space.
It's quite a unique look. And
beautiful.
And we think of conifers as being mostly in the cold regions, but about half of conifers are tropical. So they're very serpentine. Yeah, this is a tropical conifer from New Caledonia, which has the highest concentration of tropical conifers in the world. About 50 species, and this is Dacrydium aracarioides, named because it looks like the monkey puzzle trees Araucaria.
Yeah.
But it's actually related to in the Podocarpus family, the Podocarpaceae. And this is they come in separate male and female plants, and this is a male plant, and these are the small cones that produce pollen.
It's small.
It's very small, yeah, very inconspicuous.
So I guess size doesn't matter after all.
And the female cones on the female plants are even more inconspicuous. They just look like a little shoot, a little tuft of leaves, and the reproductive parts are hidden inside. So they don't look like a cone, like a normal.
But they must emit something to attract the pollinators, even though because it's of its relatively small size. To get the male to the female, it must have done something right.
Well, these conifers actually are only wind pollinated.
Oh,
which is strange.
That's convenient.
So it's just they need to be close enough together, and they release clouds of pollen and hope some find the right place. So.
Interesting.
And even if you take a cutting from an upright leader shoot on this, it seems to want to grow horizontal from a cutting. It's only from seedlings that they can continue vertical. And if you were to take a cutting of one of these side branches, it would just continue to be this pendant snaking plant. It would still grow, but it would not produce an upright shoot, which is...
That's amazing.
This is a rainforest cycad from the northern Australia and Queensland, Bowenia spectabilis, that looks more like a fern in many ways, like a giant maidenhair fern. And the leaves are, branched twice, so twice pinnate. They have a central axis, and then these side axes that then have leaflets on them.
Oh.
And so it's a much more complex leaf than most of the cycads we're used to. And this is cycads come in separate male and female plants as well. And this is a female, and it has the nice healthy group of cones coming out of its underground stems.
Now, forgive my my beginner question, but the cones are the flowers or the fruits, or what would they be?
Well, these plants actually they predate the flowering and fruiting plants, so they're more ancient. So they don't make flowers or fruits. They make these cones, and they like pines and conifers. But these are actually even an older group than the conifers are.
So you would say that these are the sexual reproductive organs of these plants, and this is the female, and the male would look a little bit different. Picture's going to be on the screen.
Absolutely, yeah. And though it's interesting that unlike the conifers, these actually are pollinated by insects.
Oh, okay.
And in fact, because people assumed that because they were ancient plants like conifers, that they would be wind pollinated, they didn't discover the insect pollination until the 1980s.
I see. And it's a low-flying insect because it's so low to the ground.
And they're little weevils, yeah, they're little kind of like beetle-like insects, and they're specialized on each cycad species. They have different species of weevil and some other related insects, and they're attracted by fragrances emitted by the male and female cones.
Wow.
And they sometimes some of these of cycads create heat to disperse the fragrance and to attract the pollinators, and then they change scent and to push them away and tell them go to the next plant.
Oh, that's fascinating. So these are actually very fragile too. They really have a strong symbiosis with a specific type of animals. The more reason we should pay attention to their environment. And
so outside their habitat, when they're grown outside there without the pollinator, the only way they will produce seed is hand pollination. You have to become the weevil. Palms are actually the reason that Fairchild Garden was started. Robert Montgomery, who started this garden and several others here, including Montgomery Botanical Center down the road, he started out collecting trees in the Northeast, and he had founded an accounting company and a tax law company and had become quite a wealthy man. But he loved plants, he loved trees, but eventually he got tired of the winters up in Connecticut, where he was from, and he was collecting conifers there. And a friend of his, George Brett of Macmillan Publishing Company, had moved to Florida for the winters and started collecting palms and invited Montgomery down to Florida to continue. They had a little bit of a rivalry as plant collectors to see who could collect the most interesting specimens. So in the early 30s, Colonel Montgomery came down to Florida and started collecting palms at his estate. And so many people were interested in seeing his palm collection that he decided there was a need for a public garden. And so he got together a group of people to found Fairchild Garden and buy the original plots that we are on right now that the garden began on. And Douglas, and she was the lady who was largely responsible for the formation of Everglades National Park. She wrote a book that she's holding in her hand there called The Everglades River of Grass, and that really captured the public's attention to how unique the Everglades ecosystem is. Back at a time when, environmentalism and ecology were not as kind of central in human culture, and that helped create the momentum to create the Everglades National Park. And she lived to be 108 years old. And she also was one of the major figures in promoting the formation of Fairchild Garden, along with David Fairchild, saying that Miami needed a public garden and a place that was a repository for all the new plant introductions. Yeah, well, Fairchild Garden here is to showcase the diversity and complexity of the tropical plants of the world, but we also do a lot of work with conservation and education and research. And behind me is the Science Village, which has several of our laboratories, so for DNA, with microscopes and photography, and the Million Orchid Project, which are the lights behind me. And this is a project to restore native orchids to the urban trees in our local county, Miami-Dade, and neighboring counties and beyond. Fairchild Garden, it has a very active and extensive education program, and one thing we try to do is to find ways to connect students with the world of plants and the world of technology. And our biggest initiative with that is called Growing Beyond Earth. It's a collaboration with NASA, where we work with students to test vegetables for growing on space missions, because the astronauts have said that the thing that they miss the most with the freeze-dried meals they have in their space missions, it isn't meat, it isn't other kinds of fresh things, but it's actually the crunchy vegetables. And they also are able to provide vitamin K, which is hard to provide in their preserved meals. So there's an effort to find ways to productively grow vegetables in a sustainable way in small spaces on space vehicles. To test and find the best varieties requires a lot of efforts across a lot of schools, and the students share their data with NASA, and some of those vegetables have actually gone up into the International Space Station for further testing, and this has been going on for about 8 years now.
Wow, that's very exciting. And I remember Summer had an episode here, so I'm going to link that somewhere up there, so you can click on that.
Absolutely.
See.
This is our molecular laboratory here, and we keep, during the day, we actually keep our laboratories open, and they're all visible to the public, so that if anyone who wants to come in and talk with researchers and learn about plant science, they're free to do it. We want to get people interacting and students interacting with science. And we have mostly volunteers, like this young lady here who's doing the work. This is our tissue culture laboratory, where we grow orchids for mostly the Million Orchid. This area of the garden we call the Rainforest, because our natural habitats here in South Florida are actually dry forest, where for about half the year it's fairly dry and warm, and then in the summer it's wet. So if we add water through irrigation, we can grow plants that grow in much wetter habitats, like rainforests. And in addition, we modify this habitat by using reverse osmosis irrigation, which allows plants from more acidic areas, which rainforests are, to grow and thrive. And we can add humidity, which this time of year it's very humid, so this makes it even more humid. But during the dry season, which starts in about a month, this really helps to make this habitat much more conducive to the tropical plants that are used to humidity all year. And we do have one special cycad there that's Encephalartos woodii, which is called sometimes the loneliest plant in the world, or one of the loneliest, because it's only a male was ever found in South Africa, and they're still looking to see if they can find a female in the wild. Yeah. But this is grown now in gardens all over the world, and they're all genetically identical clones grown from offsets.
Yeah, but they're all males.
But they're all males, yep. So our plant is right there, and it came from the Durban Botanic Garden in 1963. Cones in our climate, because it's too warm, we don't get enough of a cool period, but the nice thing is that it produces a lot more offsets in a more hotter, more tropical climate, so it's more material to propagate from, and we have actually two of its offspring next to it.
Okay, that one further
down.
Yep,
that one further down and then there's one on the other side that's smaller, and And so we have probably about 5 more. One right next to it is also a smaller version that was rooted from the original, so we've got lots of backups. So although it's very lonely, it's one of the safest plants in the world because it's so desirable to grow, and it's grown far beyond its original habitat where there was only one plant. So
Interesting.
had the advantage of, when it's a desirable plant to grow, you know, humans can actually probably extend its survival.
Yeah.
And if someday they figure out how to cause the male cycads to switch to female, which
Yeah.
has been documented a couple times, it can happen. It's incredibly rare.
Yeah.
But you know, hopefully someday we'll have actual offspring.
Yeah. I mean, another way, I guess, would be to find something very genetically close to it, another species, and just kind of interbreed them, but then you would not have the same exact genetics that.
And they have done that. They have,
Okay.
yeah, they have hybridized it with Encephalaris natalensis, one of its closest relatives, and then they've crossed those back with woody eye. But of
Yeah.
course, you're getting closer and closer.
Yeah.
Though, considering how slowly these plants grow, getting to something close to purity would take a long time.
It's interesting that the giant monsteras and the palms are like side by side. I guess the tropical palms, they can have pretty similar requirements. I guess with
Yeah,
the
and that Monstera deliciosa, yeah, likes our climate a lot. So,
Beautiful.
be next to it, yeah. So this is Araucaria rulei, one of the monkey puzzle trees from New Caledonia, which is where most of the species of Araucaria are found. So it's about like 14 of the 19 or so species of Araucaria are found there. And they look very much like something out of the dinosaur era, and almost plasticky leaves and these beautiful spirals. And they're amazing survivors. And in New Caledonia, these grow on these high metal serpentine soils that are full of iron and chromium and very acidic, and they're able to, and nickel as well, and they're able to survive in those habitats and thrive. You know, this is Cordia salvifolia from dry areas in the southwest Dominican Republic. And what's fascinating about it is its leaves are full of silica. So they're so rough and abrasive, you could actually file your nails with them.
Oh yes. Wow.
Or polish wood or something like that. And if you fold them enough, they just simply break because they're so rigid.
That is so unusual.
And when they dry out, they keep their shape because they aren't held up by water pressure like many plants, but actually just by all the silica skeleton.
Why do they do that? Is it just build up from where they live, or do they have it as a defense mechanism against something?
It seems like it's a defense mechanism, most likely, as part of it, but also it's a way to help them tolerate drought because the silica means less evaporation and less work, and they can keep their leaves open even when they're in drought stress. And I'm sure it's much less pleasant for insects to eat them.
Beautiful. Obviously, the ants are having a good time with the flowers.
So this is the Lougheed spiny forest of Madagascar garden, and South Florida, we're actually a similar latitude to North Africa, and East Africa has a similar sort of climate in that it has rainfall during the hot summers and it's dry winters. And so a lot of those succulents do well in our climate, including Madagascan succulents. So we grow a wide diversity of them here and kind of try to keep the plants from the spiny forests of southwest Madagascar together to give a sense of that habitat to visitors. One of the most alien looking floras in the world. We have a lot of these coralliform or pencil euphorbias, which are one of my favorite groups. So these,
the ones in the back.
these ones in the back and this one here that are leafless after they shed their leaves very early, and just they have this form that looks like branch coral underwater.
Which one are we talking about?
So it's kind of like this. And
Is this the Tirocali?
This is not, this is like Tirocali, but it's actually Anulala vensis. It's one from the far north of Madagascar, and it keeps this very compact form. And has a bit of a different branching habit, but it's in that group, that same coral-like group, and we have several more representatives in here of that group, like the Madagascan form of Euphorbia tirocali and Euphorbia campanii behind it, and
Yeah.
They're really only, with only a couple of exceptions, they're all from Madagascar. So it's kind of one of the specialized life forms
Yeah.
of Madagascar.
This one actually caught my eye as a
Oh yes,
as a design. This is like really, really strangely, but beautifully. What do you call it? Twisted.
has a helix, kind of a spiraling helix. Yes, indeed.
Beautiful trunk. Look at that. It looks like a snake skin.
Yeah. So see, those flowers look very similar to plumeria.
Yeah. And something's very fragrant. Maybe that one.
Yeah, I think that's that one.
Are these lotus or what's happening?
These are the big ones are Victorias from South
yeah.
America, so they're the giants. So we have Victoria Amazonica is this one, and then we have Cruziana. And there's a third species that was recently described, Boliviana, that we don't have yet.
Do they look very similar to this, or?
Yeah, they all look quite similar. But Boliviana is so far the biggest one recorded.
Yeah. But I hear that they are actually, I mean, they are terrible in that they really spread out and they drown out the sunlight. So a lot of the plants below them don't really survive.
Yeah, in the habitats where they grow, they tend to be the main organism. This is an African baobab tree, so Adansonia digitata, and it was planted by David Fairchild, whom the garden is named after, in 1939, the year after the garden opened. And so it's been through many cyclones and freezes and lots of other challenges, and it's still growing and magnificent as it ever was. A red longan, it's a longan that has some sort of mutation that makes both the leaves and the fruits red. And it arose in Vietnam, and so our mutual friend Chandra helped get it into cultivation in Indonesia and then shared it with us. And the fruits taste really wonderful. They're very aromatic. They don't have a lot of flesh.
Yeah.
And last year I noticed a branch had reverted to normal longan.
Yeah.
And it had the same color as longan fruit and lost the red. And so it seems to be a fairly simple mutation, but it creates this beautiful, much more ornamental longan. Yeah, this is a very unusual tree. This is from South America. It's Phytolacca dioica, called the ambu tree, and it's from southern Brazil through Uruguay and Argentina. And most of the members of this genus are from the colder climates, and they're little weeds in agriculture. And only 2 species in South America become big woody trees. But unlike a normal tree, which just has a living layer of outer bark and then non-living wood in the center, this has layer upon layer of living wood throughout the trunk. And you can see the concentric rings where a branch has been cut away. Each ring is like a layer of bark, so it has like layer of bark within layer of bark. So the wood is very soft, but it's got living, growing tissue throughout its trunk. And so it still grows outwards, but stays living inside, which is very unusual for a tree. It's a totally, and in fact, and what this means is this was one individual tree until 2005 when we had a cyclone that broke it in half.
Okay.
And this wounded area here grew new living bark over the entire wound.
Oh.
Which a normal tree, this would be a big open wound and fungi could get in and whatnot. But because this has the ability to basically heal any wound.
Oh, wow.
Because it has living, growing cells throughout its wood.
Yeah.
It's a whole different way of being a tree, which is quite unique. There's only two species that do this in the world.
Okay. Wonderful. I love how intricate the trunks are intertwined. These are 2 trees, or is it 1?
This was formerly 1, and the hurricane broke them in half, and then they healed over the entire wound. And
but would you consider this 1 tree now, or is this now 2? Because it looks pretty separate to me.
That's kind of an interesting philosophical question, because with plants, what is the individual because sometimes trees can have a mutation on a single branch, like seedless oranges came from, single mutations. Many of our apple varieties. And so is that a separate plant, even though it's completely connected, but has different genetics to the rest of the tree? So some botanists have likened trees to corals, there's sort of a colonial aspect to them, as well as, being a unity. And then like there are the giant clonal groups of trees, like the giant aspen clones that grow, that are all clones from their roots.
Yeah.
But then when the connections break, they're genetically identical, but they're not physically connected. And whether you call that one individual or not is a interesting question.
He has one that I kind of filmed on Instagram, and I was like, what is this? And there's people commented what it was, but it is a ficus, and it does fruit or flower in the center. I think the flower is supposed to look pretty when it's...
Yeah, they're very interesting. So the tiny flowers are inside these structures called ciconia. And because each fig has a specialized wasp that pollinates it, and this is a fig from New Guinea, Ficus brucei, and we don't have the wasp here, so these never fully develop, but they look pretty fantastic.
Interesting.
And this used to be in its own genus Damaropsis, and now it's there are only 2 species in this little group of ficus. So this is Ficus brucei, which was only named a couple of years, maybe 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And its close relative, Ficus damaropsis, the dinner plate fig.
Oh, so this is not the Damaropsis, because that's what I thought.
For many years, it was called the lowland Damaropsis because it was known to be very similar.
Yeah.
But this was from lowland New Guinea, and Damaropsis is from the highlands.
Yeah.
And then this was finally named separately, I think around 2020, it came out. The new name was published.
Sorry, this really caught my eye because when I see this, it looks like a bunch of bird nest ferns perched on a tree.
It does indeed. Gustavia superba is what it is. And it's
very peculiar.
It has, the leaves are a little bit chlorotic, so that gives them a lighter color, but it's and it has these spectacular porcelain-like pink flowers, which it currently isn't flowering, but it's a great... They do look a lot like bird's nest ferns, for sure.
Yeah. So this is chlorotic. Normally, it's not supposed to look like...
Right, yeah. Normally, it's not. It's just that this is... Because our soil is limestone, so that some trees have trouble pulling iron out of the soil.
Oh.
But it still continues to grow and be quite healthy otherwise.
Beautiful.
The Mediterranean figs that are the common edible figs, they don't like full tropics that much. They get problems with rust fungus on their leaves and nematodes. But there are some tropical edible figs that are fantastic for eating and thrive in the tropics. This is one of them, Ficus auriculata. And it grows in a fairly wide range in Southeast Asia. But like many figs, the fruits don't ripen unless they're pollinated normally. So when this is grown outside of its natural habitat, it produces a lot of these fruits, and then they fall off while they're still hard. And David Fairchild really thought this had a lot of potential as a fruit in South Florida, but he never got to taste one because they never ripened.
Oh.
But his original tree at his home was killed in a hurricane in 1992, and the curator of his collection went on several expeditions to replace trees that were lost, and he went to Bogor, Indonesia, and brought back this Ficus auriculata that it turns out actually will ripen without pollination. The trigger for continued ripening just seems to follow through without the seeds developing, and we don't know the mechanism of it actually, but it's something that happens in many of the Mediterranean figs as well. It's some sort of mutation, and in some species of figs they actually force ripening by making little cuts early in the fig's development, because that releases ethylene, the stress gas that ripens bananas and other fruits. And then the fruits will ripen, so this has some sort of a mechanism for doing that on its own. It currently doesn't have any ripe fruits, but at other times of the year, this will have very dark red soft fruits that taste a little bit like strawberries. And this was really fulfilling David Fairchild's dream, because he never got to taste one of these fruits, and he had to ask his his explorers what they tasted like, and but he never could figure out how to get them to ripen here. So we're happy to fulfill the dream a couple generations later.
Nice. And as an explorer, can you describe the taste of the fruits? Have you had the pleasure of?
Oh yeah, the fruits taste nothing like the Mediterranean figs. They have a fairly thick skin, and they're kind of pink inside, and they have a little bit of a strawberry essence. There's sort of a spiciness to them. They're slightly sweet, and they have kind of an interesting kind of a meaty texture. And in fact, my 3-year-old daughter, this is her favorite fruit. She will just eat one after another. And this is probably the world's most unusual looking plumeria. It's Plumeria filifolia from eastern Cuba. And it has these very, very narrow leaves, and it ends up looking almost more like a pine tree from a distance, like pine needles. But the flowers are classic plumeria flowers, and it creates this very elegant small tree, branch tree with drooping foliage.
Interesting.
And will confuse many people when it's not in flower.
Is this particularly difficult to care for, or is it?
It's not difficult. It's actually quite. It likes to, needs good drainage, and it likes full sun, a lot of sun, and it doesn't want to be babied really too much. So.
And I know that plumerias are mealybug magnets. Are these as well?
These mealybugs will. In our habitat, fortunately, we have a lot of natural enemies of mealybugs, so it's not a problem outside. But when they're grown in a shade house or a glass house, they definitely can.
Yeah. Beautiful. Really looks like a pine.
The genus Clusia has long fascinated me. They have these very beautiful, glossy, opposite leaves. Often, many of them are succulent. Their leaves are quite thick. And there are about 400 species, only found in the tropics of the Americas. Mm-hmm. And they're unique among woody plants in that many species can switch how they do photosynthesis. Like normal trees, they can do C3 photosynthesis, which means the little pores in the leaves, the stomata, remain open during the day and take in CO2, and they make it into sugars. But then if water is limiting, they can photosynthesize like a cactus. And where they will close the little pores in the leaves, the stomata, during the day, open them at night, take in the CO2, store it temporarily as organic acids like malic acid that makes apples have their distinctive taste. And they store that in these thick succulent leaves. And then during the day, they close their stomata and release the CO2 internally. And then use the sunlight to make it into sugars, but without letting water out by having the pores open. So that's exactly the same thing that cacti do.
It's like CAM.
Yeah, it's CAM, exactly. It's crassulacean acid metabolism.
Oh, interesting.
And in fact, they're so flexible. If one part of the Clusia is like in bright sun and water stressed, it can do CAM, and another part in shade will do C3. And you can even do this leaf pair. You can get one to do CAM and one to do C3.
That's funny.
And so plant physiologists are really fascinated by Clusia for that reason. And they also have very beautiful flowers that look like porcelain. And the male and female, this is another group of plants that has separate male and female individuals. And the male and female flowers can look so different, you almost may not be sure whether they're different species or not.
It's probably a palm or cycad, or what is this?
This is a cycad. This is a Zamia angustifolia from the Bahamas, and it's named after angustifolia, means narrow leaves. So its leaflets are very, very narrow. So the genus Phyllanthus is all over the tropics of the world, but there's a group in the Caribbean that has branches, stems that actually function as leaves that are flattened, and that's where the genus gets its name, Phyllanthus, which means flowering leaf. And these flattened leaf-like branches have flowers along the edges, which is one clue that they actually aren't leaves. They're actually, because leaves themselves don't tend to make flowers.
This really looks a lot like a jungle cactus. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it does, and it's also adapted to, arid environments, and they have very thick, waxy. They call these phyllodes or phyloclades, these leaf-like branches. They're quite lovely. This is another one here this is one from the Dominican Republic. This one's from Puerto Rico. And this little group of Phyllanthus is only found in the Caribbean.
This is actually very, very beautiful. But this is a full sun plant that would love it outside.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Generally.
In the tropical. But this is so beautiful. Look at this. My gosh. If you're a Hoya lover, this is exactly the kind of things we love. Like succulent leaves that is very sexy. But they do produce these flowers along the leaves that's also very interesting. Oh, thank you for showing us this. This is quite something.
Absolutely. No, I thought this would be.
But this is a common plant, or is it like?
No, we'd like it. It'd be nice if it was more common. And there's another version over here from the Bahamas. But yeah, no, this is not common at all.
But is this difficult to grow, or do you know?
No, it's not that difficult. And the cuttings root fairly well, and but it's just not something that's kind of made it into widespread nursery cultivation yet, but hopefully one day.
Maybe you guys should get into this plant. Find it in your local, ask your local nursery to order some of these. Beautiful.
The leaves have this interesting, well, they're not leaves, the stems have this interesting curve to them.
So do you call these stems, actually?
So those are actually flattened stems that function like leaves and look just like leaves, and but then they produce flowers like a stem.
But do these actually technically have leaves?
They do have leaves, but they're very, 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 very tiny, just kind of these little tiny scales there. And then you can also see there's another leaf at the base of these branches. Because this is technically a branch, and so branches have a leaf in the base of the axil, but those fall away very quickly, so they really don't have any function, and they just use stems to do everything above ground.
Yeah, and can you cut and just stick it on the ground and it'll propagate, or?
I don't think they root quite that easily. We've rooted them under mist with intermittent mist, but it probably need a bag or something to keep the humidity up for a while, because they're slow to root. So
so they might die before they actually.
They probably would die if you just stuck it in the ground. You'd probably need to put it in a clear bag.
Or maybe you could also do the what do you call air layering? Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, you could definitely air layer. And these often will produce seed too.
Oh yeah.
Though if you have more than one type, they hybridize very regularly.
So not a good idea to put them all in one.
So if you want, in fact, these are the little fruits. They're like they're in the kind of distant relatives of euphorbia, so they sometimes have been put in that genus. So they have similar types of fruits that split open.
So this shows that actually there are a lot of potential in the ornamental market that we have not fully explored, or in some way exploited. I don't know. Hopefully everyone's sourcing sustainably, but this is one such plant that we have strong implications.
Absolutely, yeah. There's so many groups that have plants that have so much potential, and just need someone to fall in love with them and start
set the trend.
Yeah, and set the trend and start being creative in how they're used and how they're bred. And this is a very rare and beautiful tree that's only found in one small part of Haiti in the Caribbean, and it's Neobuchia pollinae. It's related to the more common silk floss tree, but it has much finer foliage, and it has these wonderfully spiny trunk with all these green fissures in it. And it is really well adapted to seasonally dry habitats.
Well, you don't want to run into this for sure.
Definitely not.
I wouldn't wish even my worst enemy. I mean, the primary function. Ooh, there's a lizard. Ooh, that startled me. The primary function of me. That's that lizard. Hey, I guess it's to keep people away, but maybe it is a climbing ladder for little lizards. But for bigger mammals, I'm sure it is to deter them?
Yeah, that does seem to be the case. Yeah, because they get less spiny as they get older.
Yeah.
So it's to probably protect the juvenile succulent growth.
Yeah. And this is beautiful. This is very, very electrifying. If you look at it, that green.
Yeah, so this is a fascinating plant. This is Equisetum giganteum. It's an ancient relative of ferns, and back during the Carboniferous period, where we get most of our coal and gas from, these became big trees. And so there are only about 18 species left in the world, and only a couple that are tropical, and this is the biggest of them, this and its sister species, Equisetum myriachedum.
And you said they're closely related to ferns?
That's right.
Okay.
And so these are related to ferns, and like ferns, they make spores, but their spores, instead of being on leaves, are actually on these little cones.
Oh, fascinating. And these are the fronds?
And these are actually all stems. The actual leaves are actually fused around each of these sheaths. They're actually a fusion of many leaves into one single sheath.
Okay.
And the sheath, when they're young, is green, and then it kind of becomes dried out at maturity.
Yeah. And am I correct to assume they're aquatic, or are they?
These grow semi-aquatic. They like to have their feet wet, grow in water, and and these can get, about 5 meters tall in South America. Notable for their great amount of symmetry, where they have all these whorls of branches around each node in concentric circles. And these are also the spores that they produce have these little wings called elaters, and they flip out or in with changes of humidity, and they will actually jump around, which is quite unique.
Fascinating.
And the stems telescope out like bamboo, but they aren't related at all to bamboo, which are flowering plants in the grass family. And they have a meristem that produces new growth at each node, and then you can, when they're in the process of developing, you can just pull them apart very easily into segments.
And this is an invasive species, as you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, yeah.
Most of them.
Yeah.
This one in Indonesia, I bought this. It says it's a variegated ginseng.
It actually did have a name on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess Talinium patens var legatum. Yeah, this is a very remarkable plant that went extinct on Easter Island about 50 years ago. It's Sophora toromiro, and it was the last living specimen was around in the early 60s or so. This specimen is a little bit stressed because it got a little too dry once, but it's coming back. And Thor Heyerdahl, a famous explorer, brought seeds back to several gardens in the 60s, and some people grew it who were gardeners in Chile, which Easter Island's part of Chile, and so it survived because of gardeners, basically, and because of botanical gardens and private gardens, and it's since been reintroduced to Easter Island.
Nice.
But if people didn't grow it as horticulturally, it wouldn't have survived. So,
did you know why it went extinct in the first place?
It seems it's probably because goats would eat them, and the goats were introduced by Europeans, and the last one that survived was just like hanging on the edge of a cliff where nothing could get to it. So,
well, when you reintroduced it back, are the goats still there?
No, they've fenced off area and they've removed a lot of them, so they're able to keep growing them there.
It's funny, but it's good. XC2 conservation.
XC2 conservation.
We're all for it.
And it's a surprise that it will even grow here in South Florida, because Easter Island's a much cooler climate, and so it's been a nice. We were gifted this by a botanical garden in Hawaii that is growing it very well.
It's wonderful that all these botanical gardens you mentioned throughout the tour, like you guys have an alliance, you guys have a common goal, common values, and of course with some of our plant collectors in Indonesia who are sharing cutting plants back and forth with you guys. Beautiful stories. Yeah, we've mentioned a lot of stories off screen that you guys didn't hear. Some of them were pretty moving. So yeah.
And as they say, the best way to keep a plant is to give it away.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Nice.
Now, this is an unusual plant we have here at the nursery. It's a melastome, so it's related to Medinillas. And, but it has a very interesting feature in that some of these South American melastomes in this genus Tacoca, they have a mutual relationship with ants that live in these interesting swollen structures at the top of the petioles, and that help defend them from predators, from insects.
I thought this just means that there are males. And so these leaves are super fine, super thin, with a lot of fuzziness. You said they have a symbiotic relationship with ants. Do you think that these might be just conveniently there for the ants to kind of walk on, like ladders? Because Nepenthes have that. I don't know if this is the function.
It's possible. Could certainly be one function. One function that's often of hairs on leaves is to kind of help conserve water a little bit, because it slows down the airflow right at the leaf surface. So that might also be because this is a very thirsty plant, so it could have all kinds of various functions like that.
Yeah, but if you look at the hair on the edge of the leaf, it goes left, right, almost like a ladder.
Yeah.
Like a Nepenthes sometimes does. So I don't know, maybe it's got dual function, but it's very thin.
Entirely possible. It's entirely possible.
Nice.
Though we don't have any native ants that colonize these, alas, so we aren't in a position to test it here, but I think people who study them should test it.
And did you say where it's from?
This is from northern South America.
Do you think it's got any implications as a houseplant, or is it more like a landscapey plant?
This is probably a little delicate for a houseplant. It likes humidity, and it's got very thin leaves. But, in a terrarium, a large terrarium, it's quite possible. You have to prune it a lot.
Yeah. And one last question. You said, so this, I was distracted earlier by the morphology of this, but the ants, what do they do with this bulb?
So they actually live in these are hollow, and so the ants, will chew a little hole in it, and it becomes a little nest.
And then I guess they will take in the nutrients directly from the ants colony and living inside?
Yeah, and they deposit their feces and whatnot inside, and the plant feeds off that, and And the plant probably produces something for the ants.
Yeah.
I think they have some little nectaries that the ants feed off of, and then they defend the plant from predators.
Yeah, from like, like sometimes the philodendrons, they put out extra floral nectaries. It's kind of like that. The plant is asking the ants to come over. I have a funny question for you. How many ants would fit in one of these? Have you guys?
That I don't. When the ones I've seen, they just would have a few ants out at any given time. But yeah, it's probably a couple dozen, I would guess.
Oh, beautiful. It's coming out silver on the screen, but it really is a very dark,
kind of dark,
almost
yeah,
bluish sheen in for the naked eye. All right, can you?
Yeah, this is a cyclanth from Panama. It grows along rivers in the rainforest on the Caribbean coast of Panama. And it's in the genus Dicranopegium. They often call it violets, but it doesn't seem to have a formal name yet. And it's a beautiful small plant. It makes a great terrarium plant. It likes humidity and it likes lower light, but it has just really gorgeous color, and it has these little inflorescences here that when they open up, they have these very spaghetti-like stamens that come out. And this one has some babies that were from previous fruitings and flowerings.
Wait, so this is not an offset, or is this a seed? Oh,
These are actually seedlings. Yeah, this is an offset.
That's an offset.
And these are seedlings. Yeah, so
cute.
it took many years to finally start producing seedlings, but it's
Interesting. It's a slow grower for you.
it's flowered for a while, but then for some reason we didn't get seedlings coming up until about the last year. So
Interesting.
it is fairly slow growing.
The plants that are featured in this area, they're not on display in the garden yet. So you guys are readying them for display.
Yeah, we're readying them for display, or they're plants that we don't really have the right habitat for yet, and we're developing that in the main garden,
Interesting.
or just simply to study them, yeah. This is Anthurium antiochens, so it's from Colombia originally, and it doesn't look like most anthuriums, but it grows along rivers, and it has similar leaves to a lot of the Asian anthuriums that grow along rivers as well, fairly narrow and small so that they don't resist the water flow when the rivers flood. And it makes nice compact clumps and has roots that are quite adhesive to hold onto rocks, or they also attach to pots very firmly, and have these beautiful little inflorescences with a little blush of pink, mostly white.
Oh, this is super adorable. It does feel like a spathiphyllum in a way, but yeah, this is an anthurium. I guess this also might cross well with the anthuriums that are very sought after in the trade today. So this is really cool. Is this uncommon, or is this?
This is uncommon, yeah. There's a close relative of this, Anthurium amnicola, which has purple spathe and spadix that's used as a parent in a number of hybrids, giving that purple color in the spathe and spadix. But and the other thing is the spathiphyllums are also often grow along rivers, so it's the similarities are partly due to adaptations to that habitat.
Yeah, but this one has far thicker leaves than the spathiphyllum.
Yeah,
actually. Really interesting on its own, but potential for as a parent plant, maybe an anthurium hybridizing.
So this is a plant, Guarea kunthiana, that does something very unusual in the plant kingdom. So outside of ferns, generally leaves grow to a certain size and then they stop growing. It's called determinate growth. They kind of have a plan for when they're going to stop. There are two genera in this family Meliaceae that have leaves that continue to grow indefinitely. And so this whole structure here is a compound leaf.
Yeah.
And right at the end, you can see it has a bud.
Yeah.
That continues to produce new pairs of leaflets indefinitely. And this whole leaf will get woody, just like a branch. So it's kind of a leaf that functions like a branch. And you can root the leaves. You could take a cutting and it would root, but it would just continue making leaf pairs. And if the bud was damaged, it would stop growing because it doesn't have any of the structures in the stem that would, the meristems that would produce new shoots.
Interesting. But is this like usually in the wild, would this like creep, or would they like climb, or? This
kind of is a climber, leaner. It does, support itself mostly, but they kind of would twine through the canopy a little bit with the support of other plants. And another interesting feature of this is that these leaves naturally the edges, these little pieces will fall out naturally. It looks like it's been nibbled by something. So it seems to simulate having been eaten by an herbivore, which may deter herbivores from coming, because
Yeah.
If I hadn't seen how this happens, these actually, it actually has programmed areas where the leaf marges just fall off and give it that eaten look.
Oh, wow.
Right there.
Okay.
See a little bug,
That's where it starts.
little bug.
But it comes right off.
Yeah, so that will come off, and that will. we can take it off.
You
to,
can. Maybe I'm
to
recording.
do it live here, so we can. And that little piece comes
wow.
out.
Oh my gosh.
And it looks just like a caterpillar or something ate there.
Yeah. Oh my God, that is hilarious.
So it's simulating being eaten. Okay, so.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's.
And I've never seen that happen in any other plant, so this is very unusual in many respects. This is Philarthron cauliflorum, so this is from Madagascar, and it's in this very strange genus of trees and shrubs that's only found in Madagascar. And this characteristic they have this whole structure here is a leaf. But instead of being a normal compound leaf where you'd have leaflets coming off of each joint here, and instead the main where the petiole kind of becomes the central rachis, the central axis, it's just spread out into these flanges. And so it's kind of like the whole thing is like the central axis or petiole of the leaf, but then spread out. So it's a whole other way to make a leaf-like structure.
So, I mean, I see that this is spreading. This is a new leaf, and it's going to expand in size. But does it stops at some point?
Yeah, these don't continue growing.
Like the one before.
Yeah, these just terminate like a normal leaf.
But it's interesting. I mean, it's kind of conjoined like this. What is the purpose of this?
Well, it seems like, it's almost like they've lost. It's like they have the basic structure of a compound leaf where you'd have an axis and then leaflets coming off, but instead of having the leaflets, they just have expanded the central axis, flattened it out and drawn it out. And how that happened is kind of mysterious. And it's characteristic of this whole genus. Some species have really broad flanges and some have very narrow ones. Like there's one from an arid area that has very narrow flanges. Interesting.
And is this an uncommon plant?
Yeah, this seems, it's a new introduction to horticulture here for sure. And we were founded at the Rama 9 sale in Thailand last year.
Interesting. And do you think this is a plant that will do well as a house plant or as a landscaping or just as a specialty collector's item?
We've discovered, much to our delights, that it roots easily from cuttings. So I've tried a few cuttings and they rooted quickly and well. And it has fairly waxy leaves, so it probably have some tolerance of low humidity. A lot of places in Madagascar can have fairly low humidity sometimes of the year. So it may be a good houseplant. I think it seems to be tolerant of lower light.
Right.
And it doesn't seem to want to become a large plant quickly or anything. So, but we're just testing it now. It certainly seems to be a good landscape plant here. We've got 2 in the ground doing well. And so we think it's got potential, but like any new plant, it needs further investigation to see what its tolerances are.
So you say when you cut it like this, or how?
That's one way. The cuttings I rooted were actually offshoots that had come from a lower shoot on another specimen, and they were very thin and they rooted surprisingly well, and I'm sure that would root easily from
possibly
larger shoots as well. But these being actual leaves, they wouldn't make good cuttings. They kind of look like a stem. This is a gorgeous costus that doesn't have a species name yet, as far as I'm aware. But it has really velvety leaves, but it also has these incredibly rich red undersides. So the other red species we have are all smooth leaves. And we have some species that have velvety leaves, that have hairs on the leaves, but this is the only one I know of that has both. So I'm really excited about it.
Nice. And it is incredibly fuzzy.
Yeah, this is a really wonderful euphorbia from Madagascar, Euphorbia robivallone. That's really special in that it's a semi-succulent. It has succulent stems and rubbery leaves, but it's from a habitat along rivers, so it tolerates a lot of moisture. So you can water it more like a normal plant frequently. Once it gets mature, it continuously produces these elegant little white and kind of purplish pink flowers. And it makes a beautiful little shrub and is a good container plant, good house plant probably.
And is this a full sun plant, do you think?
It seems to prefer a little bit of shade. It doesn't seem to really want to be full, but it might be able to tolerate full sun. Yeah, Ficus deltoidea is a fascinating species from Southeast Asia, and it has all these incredible variants from one location to another. And but its most distinctive feature is these branching veins, the veins that split in half and then split in half again and create this fan shape. But it's also very variable in leaf shape. But it also, another major characteristic are these little golden dots on the upper surface that are hydrathodes that will excrete moisture in the morning. And it's a truly epiphytic fig, meaning it only grows on top of rocks or trees. It doesn't want to be in the ground.
Ah.
It actually, they have fibrous roots and they don't want to grow in compact soil. They want to grow and so they make fantastic container plants.
Okay.
And they have everything from larger leafed and larger fig forms to very tiny leafed and very tiny fig forms.
Sure. And before we lose this, what is the name of this? I'll edit it in. The name.
Ficus deltoidea.
Ficus deltoidea, and this one?
These are all Ficus deltoidea. So these are all variations of this one species these are wild forms too. These are all different forms from different locations through Malaysia, Borneo, Indonesia, and it goes all the way to the Philippines. And
I would not have guessed that.
And it's this very complex species that seems to be in the middle of some sort of evolutionary, diversification.
Oh, cool.
And the great botanist E.H. Corner wrote a paper on these in the late 60s showing all this incredible variation. And the more it seems like we don't even know how many forms there are. There are probably at least 100 different forms. And when you grow them outside their native habitats, they don't make viable seeds, so you propagate them only by cuttings.
I see, because they use wasps or?
As they have specialized wasps that pollinate only them, and the wasps don't seem to travel very well with the plants. So you can see variations in vein patterns. So this one doesn't have the strict branching as much. It's kind of a combination of a central vein and the dichotomizing, the splitting veins. And we have this form.
That's also one?
This is also it. This is variety. This one has a name, variety Motley.
Okay.
And it has fairly normal veins. It's like a more typical leaf with a central vein and veins branching off it.
Yeah.
But it's still, based on its figs, it's still a Ficus deltoidea.
Oh, it has. Oh, that's really mind-blowing.
And there are some individuals of these where you can grow that will have both the central vein and the branching veins on one stem. Sometimes some of them will vary a lot as they develop. Like the first leaves of these deltoideas from seedlings, they look like this, and then they diverge into all these different forms upon maturity.
Yeah. Now, quick care tips, if I may.
Yeah, they like good drainage.
Yeah.
And they like to be, so you want to add like things like perlites or other material or pumice that help the soil drain or sand. So you grow them like an epiphyte, and they like to be in baskets. They like to be in pots. They don't want to grow in the ground.
Really?
They really suffer being in the ground.
Oh.
And in fact, the best I've done with them in the ground, they just kind of go into stasis for a long time. And
it's creeping along. I mean, I thought they were trees or something, but
nope,
they're creeping around. I guess they're looking for something to lean on.
Yeah, and or maybe kind of leaning over a branch or a rock. The only ones I've seen in the wild were on rocks, on big boulders. And they have the variety of habits. Like this one is a little more upright. And this one is very spreading with these big heart-shaped leaves. This is
Yeah. And what are the function of the dots in the back?
The dots in the back are oil glands, it seems, which may, attract certain insects. But they don't exactly know what they're for, but they vary. Some species, they're very prominent, and some hardly, not different species, but some individuals very prominent. In some forms, they're much less prominent. So
And are they full sun plants or?
They can tolerate full sun generally, but they generally prefer part shade.
Okay.
They're actually, and they're generally fairly tolerant of drought, of going dry.
Yeah. I think it's sold as houseplants as well in common garden centers. Certain varieties of them. So I guess they are houseplants, or are they
They can be very good houseplants. In fact, I have some friends in the United Kingdom who say they grow very well in England as houseplants in the windowsills. Some plants, when you take a cutting of a branch, the branch continues to remember it's a branch indefinitely. So this is from a conifer, Cephalotaxis mannii from Southeast Asia, that normally grows into a tree. But if you grow one of its side branches, root it, it never really forgets that it is a branch. So this has been growing for over 20 years from a cutting, and it continues to be horizontal, but the branches branch and it becomes a beautiful weeping plant. But it has some sort of memory as to that it was a branch in the tree in the wild, and it just continues to grow that way. Whereas other plants will forget very easily and grow upright.
Interesting.
And so if you were to grow this from seed, it would form a nice leader like a normal tree. So,
Yeah, and this is the central, would you call this a trunk or what is?
yeah, this is where the original, it's kind of under some moss here, but yeah, that's where the original cutting was rooted, and it's continued to branch very luxuriantly, but it branches very horizontally.
Beautiful, actually, but they're okay. I mean, it looks good as a hanging basket.
Yeah,
Almost.
it'd be a perfect hanging basket, but it's probably due to epigenetics, which is where there are certain changes that aren't in the genes, but in how the genes are expressed. All this genus Cephalotaxis, it's always this way from branch cuttings. They just stay branches. And in fact, Atlanta Botanical Garden, a close relative, it's a Florida native conifer that does the same thing. And they have all these cuttings from the wild population that's very endangered, and they're all doing this. And then they make fruits. Well, they aren't fruit. They look like fruits, but they're cones. And they grow them from seed, and they're normal.
Oh.
So the parents have this form, but then the seedlings are perfectly normal, upright. Okay, so this is the famous Fairchild crystallinum, Anthurium crystallinum, which our arid breeder thinks is probably more related to magnificum. But its origins remain fairly mysterious. It's been in our conservatory for many years, and I wasn't able to locate any specific records about where it came from, but it's quite a remarkable plant. It's one of the favorites of the queen of aroids, Enid Alfalter, and we're happy that it's now available to many people to grow from self-seedlings and from several sources.
All right, Chad, thank you so much for your time today. I learned so much. Now, where can we find you on Instagram, and where can we find some of the seedlings, please?
Yeah, I'm at Chad Husby on Instagram, and these seedlings can be found, we sell them on eBay and on Palm Street for live sales. And we also do some local sales several times a year.
Big thank you to Chad for giving me the time of day, and of course for the rest of you who made it all the way to the very end, please smash the like button. And since we covered a huge diversity of topics and plants here, I would love to know which topic in particular you liked in the comment section. This will inform me on better future content. If you would like to support the channel financially, there are two ways. Join as a YouTube member simply by opening any OnlyPlants episode on a computer browser, and next to the channel icon there will be a join button. This is for as small as a cup of coffee a month, but you will be making a huge difference. The next option would be to join my Patreon at patreon.com/Sean from OnlyPlants. I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to those who have contributed to the channel. These monthly supports significantly improve my life and content quality for all to enjoy. I will see you all in 2 weeks' time. Take care now. Bye.